will last for 60 minutes, 45 minutes approximately of presentation, and then 15 minutes for you to ask me some questions. Please use the question and answer box for your questions. My team will be answering those as we go through, and obviously I'll be answering your questions at the end. But it's very important this. Please use the chat box to respond to me. During this webinar, I'm going to give you some things to do, and I'm going to ask you questions, and I can't see the question and answer box until the end. So please use the chat box. When I ask you a question, please put your answer in the chat box. It not be possible to answer absolutely everybody's questions in the time. So please, if you see a question that's very similar to yours, like it. And then obviously what we'll do is we'll try and answer the questions which are most liked. So if a question that's similar, just put like and we'll try and get to it. As you will have heard, the webinar is being recorded and we'll email you within 3 days with the link so that you can go through the webinar as many times as you like at home. If you have any questions about your test booking, please contact your test centre. I'm afraid because things are changing so rapidly around the world, we don't have information about what's happening in different regions and different countries and towns. So please go to your test centre. Equally, if you have questions about their IELTS indicator test, please go to this website, look at that, get the information you need about what's available in your part of the world. And lastly, the British Council is very concerned about privacy of data. So please do not share phone numbers or any personal information in the chat box or in the Q&A. And please, of course, be courteous at all times. If not, we might have to exclude someone from a webinar, and we wouldn't like to do that at all. Okay, so the programme. But before we start with the programme, we've got some questions for you. If you can't see the poll question, don't worry. I'm going to read them out and you can put your answers in the chat box. Remember, the chat box, not the Q&A. So can we have poll question number 1, please? Okay, so for people who can't see this, question number 1 is, have you taken the IELTS test before? Please put your answer in the chat box. And what score do you need? Again, just put the number of the band score that you need to do whatever it is you want to do. And for everybody else who can see it, please tick one of those. I'll just give you a couple more seconds. Okay, let's see the results, please. Okay, again, very interesting. So 79% haven't taken the test before. Okay, that's, I hope this is going to be helpful. And for those of you who have taken it before, I hope this will give you some insight so that if you need to take it again, it might help you with that. And scores, okay, again, high level scores, 6 to 9s are the predominant, and I hope we'll be dealing with some of the worries on that level. And can we have the next poll question, please? Okay, again, for those of you who can't see it, first question is, have you attended a British Council IELTS webinar before? Yes or no in the chat box, please. Okay, good. And then can you say which webinar or webinars you've attended? So the introduction to IELTS, writing task 1, graphs and charts, general training writing, writing task 2, academic reading, general training reading, listening and speaking. So if you just tick or write the ones that you have attended in the past. Thank you, and let's have a look at the results of that. Okay, so over 3/4 of you have been before. Well, welcome back, and a big welcome to the new people as well. So lots of you have been to the graphs and charts, the introduction, okay, academic reading. Okay, so covering quite a lot of things though. Thank you very much for that information. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to try and get through this afternoon. Remember, it's academic writing task 1, and we're going to be looking at process diagrams and maps, not bars and charts. We will do that in a repeat webinar later. So for process diagrams, we're going to look at a model for writing. We're going to look at the grammar and vocabulary that you need to answer this well. And we're going to look at the linking devices that pulls your description, your report together. And then for maps, we're going to look again at a good model that you can follow for your writing. We're going to just look at how you can plan it to get the most important information from it. And we're going to look at vocabulary and grammar there as well. Then we'll have a chance for you to ask some questions and hopefully for me to be able to answer them. And then I'll go through some resources that you can use for self-study while you're at home waiting for everything to open up. Okay, so let's start on a process diagram. And let's look at a model of how to write a good answer. So it would be 2 or 3 parts, this. First of all, you need an introduction, a paragraph. And in that you'll say what the diagram is, and you'll give the overview, which is very important. So we'll be coming back to that in quite some detail. Then you have a body paragraph. It's usually only 1 in a process diagram, no more than that, because it's one whole thing that you're describing. So it's normally 1 paragraph. And there you must choose the important parts of the process that support your overview and describe what happens in those parts. And then if you have time, and only if you have time, you can write a conclusion. You don't have to write a conclusion, but lots of people like to. And if you've got time, it just finishes off your essay very nicely. And it's very simple because all you have to do is rephrase the introduction and restate what your interview is. Your overview is. Okay. So let's have a look at a sample question. So in the process diagram, you could get something like this, a sort of manufacturing or industrial process. You could get a natural process, for example, how to get tea from the plant to the tea in your tea bag or whatever. You could get a natural process like the rain cycle, but this is a fairly typical one. And we'll be coming back to this in some detail. But let's look at writing the introduction. Okay, so the introduction has 2 parts. That's very important. So the introduction is a paragraph and it has 2 parts. The first part is a rephrasing of the question, saying what it is that you're looking at, what the diagram is. And the second really important part is the overview. Now, what is the overview for a process diagram? Please put your answers in the chat box, not in the question and answer. The question and answer is just for anything that you don't understand or a particular question you want to ask. The chat box is when I ask you questions and ask you for an answer. So what do you think you put in an overview? Okay, the answers are coming in thick and fast. Okay, Mohammed, main points, yes, exactly. Anwar, stages, very good, Anwar. Yeah, a lot of you are saying stages or steps. Excellent. Let's put that. It's exactly that. It's the number of steps or stages in the process. Okay, so why is that important? Why is the overview important? Well, many of you from the poll question are obviously looking for 7s, 8s and 9s. In order to get 7 and above, you must present a clear overview of the main stages. So quite simply, if you don't have a clear overview, if you don't state exactly the number of steps or stages in the process, that limits your score in task achievement. So it is something that is very important and that we will focus on a little bit in this webinar. Okay, so introduction, writing the first sentence of the introduction. Those of you who've been to the previous one on graphs and charts will know that this is a rewriting process. It's looking at what is said on the test paper and changing that into your own words. So let's have a little practice of that. So let's start with diagram. In the chat box, can you say what else we could put instead of diagram? And a synonym or another way of saying diagram in the chat box, if you would. Okay, yes. Okay, illustration, brilliant. Yes, it could be illustration. A lot of you are putting process diagram. Some of you are putting figure. Yeah, all of those are great answers. Yeah, well done. Let's look at the next word, manufactured. Can you think of another way of saying manufactured? Yeah, well, nearly everyone's putting made. Yeah, absolutely. Made would be absolutely fine. And building, the building industry. Can you think of another word for building in this context? Again, in the chat box, please, not in the Q&A. Not in the Q&A. I can't see Q&A, so please put it in the chat box. Yes. Yeah, okay. Some people have put housing industry. That's a possibility. Yep. Yep. A couple of people are putting construction. Excellent. Okay, so exactly that. So mainly I've got the same ideas as you have. So instead of diagram, we show the examiner, we know exactly what it is. It's a process diagram and shows the process by which, illustrates how. It's just saying exactly the same thing in your own words. Manufactured, made, and construction rather than building. So that's the first sentence. It's taking some of the words and showing that you can add your own vocabulary. You don't have to do every single word. A brick is a brick is a brick. You don't want to do a synonym of something as basic as that. Okay, so then let's go back to the actual sample question. So that was the first sentence. So now we've got to develop a way of writing the overview. So what I'd like you to do is look at this diagram, and I'm going to ask for the next poll question. Could I have the next poll question, please? While we're waiting for the poll question, what I'd like you to do is to look at this diagram and say how many steps you think there are in this process. Okay, have a look. And if you can see the poll question, please answer there. If you can't, just write the number of steps that you think there are in the chat box. I'll just give you a minute for that one, a few seconds for that. Okay, yeah, a difference of numbers, okay. Yeah, okay. Can we have the results, please? Okay, so a lot of you think that 7, but some say 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, a mixture. Let's go through it together and let's see how many steps I think there are. Okay, for me, the first step, and I'm sure for the rest of you, is the digging of the clay. So step number 1 is digging the clay. For me, step number 2 is the fact that it's shaken up for the clay to drop through onto the roller, through the metal grid. And then sand and water are added. So for me, that's step 3. Step 4 is the sort of 2 parts of step 4, but it's the formation of the brick shape, and that can be done either by cutting it or it can be done by putting it in a mold. But basically, for me, it's the same stage because it's making brick shapes. There are just 2 methods for doing that. The next step for me is the fact that these brick shapes are then dried for a period of time. And then I've put 2 things together here because in my step 6 is they're put into a kiln and they're cooked, they're baked. They're baked at a low heat at the beginning and then at a higher heat. You could, if you wanted to, make that 6 and 7. We'll come to that in a minute, but I'm putting those together. My 7th is the fact that they're then cooled. 8 is that they're packaged. And the last step is that they're put on a lorry and delivered to their customers. So for me, there's 9 steps. And this is how I would express it. It is clear from this diagram that there are 9 main steps in the process from the digging of the raw clay to the transportation of the bricks. And so just to improve the overview, apart from putting how many steps there are, I've also put the first one and the last one. So I've put the digging of the clay and the transportation of the bricks. Okay, so looking at this number of 9, why is it important? Excuse me. So how important is the number of steps? Well, the point is that to get a good score in coherence and cohesion, you need to organize your body paragraph logically. And therefore it's logical that if you have said 9 steps in your overview, logically, you would describe 9 steps in your body paragraph from 1 to 9. So I would strongly advise you to do this in your test. Actually put the numbers on the diagram, on the test paper, to remind you of the number of steps and which ones you have to describe. So basically, if you say there are 9 steps, describe 9. If you say there are 10, describe 10. Okay, so let's look at a model answer. Okay, I'm going to give you a few seconds to read through this. And when you've read through it, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. So let me just give you a moment to read. Okay, so question number 1 in the chat box, please. What are the words and phrases in red? In red, what types of words or phrases are they? Okay, some people are putting adverbs. Yes, they are. What's their function? What are they doing? Somebody's put linking. Yes, showing order. Yeah, very good. Yeah, exactly that, showing order. Okay, brilliant. What about in blue? What are the words and phrases in blue? Yeah, well, everybody's got verbs. Some of you have said passives. Very good. Okay, because that leads us straight on to the grammar and vocabulary that we need to write a good process diagram report or description. Okay, so when we're describing a process, we're not at all interested in the people who are doing it. We're only interested in the actual process, the action, what's happening to the material. So we use the passive voice. And just a little reminder for you, present passive, if it's a process which is still happening now, it isn't on the past participle. You might sometimes get an ancient process, perhaps how Egyptians made papyrus or something like that. And then you have was and were and the past participle. So let's just go back. Is dug out, is put, are added, is cut or molded. So all of those are in the passive, present passive. Okay, so we use that and the past participle. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of a grammar test. If you've got a piece of paper, or you can get a piece of, a blank document on your computer, whatever, I'd like you to write numbers 1 to 10 on that piece of paper or on your computer. Okay, here's your test. Here are 10 verbs that you could use with describing processes. Can you write down on your piece of paper or on your computer the past participle for each of these words? I'll give you a little bit of time for that. Okay. All right, and let's have a look at the answers. Okay, there you are. So any of you who got 10 out of 10, give yourselves a big pat on the shoulder, pat on the back. Do remember that you will need to know the past participle of these verbs when you're writing a process. Okay, and the other bit of sort of grammar and vocabulary are the linking devices. So a process is a bit like a recipe. And so if you're telling somebody how to cook your national dish, you'd say, well, first you do that, and then you do that, and after that you do this. And that's exactly what we do when we're describing a process for academic writing task 1. So, and again, it's important for coherence and cohesion to get you up into sort of the band 7s. So there are some examples. And let's just flip back quickly. So firstly, next, then after this, once, then afterwards, at this stage. Okay, so try and use the passive voice and these sequential linkers. Okay, so that was a fairly quick look through at processes, but we will come back to it and summarize what we looked at. Next, we're going to move on to comparing maps. Okay. So very often we have 2 maps or plans as a question in task 1. And these are some things that you need to think about before you even start writing. So check what time period the plans are about, or the maps are about, and therefore what tenses are appropriate. So look at the dates that they put on the maps. Think about the appropriate language you're going to need. So you're going to need to be able to compare and contrast. You're going to need to sort of describe change to places, about developed or modernized, those sorts of words. And then, of course, as with all of these, you're going to have to link all your ideas together. And length, probably about 100 to 120 words for the body paragraph. Remember, you've already written an introduction, which might well be 30, 40 words, and you might have time for another 10 or 15 words for your conclusion. So 100 to 120 words for the body paragraph should do the trick. Okay, let's have a look at a sample. Let's have a look at a model of how to write. And as with all the others, it's a sort of a three-part. So the introduction, again, saying what the maps are and what dates are given. And again, that all-important overview. The body paragraph, choose the biggest changes that support your overview. Again, can't stress enough how important it is to write a clear overview in your introduction and then support that in your body paragraph. And then you describe those changes and you remember to make comparisons either before and now or now and in the future, depending on the dates on the map. And again, conclusion, if there is time, write a conclusion. If you don't have time, it really is not important. But again, it's just rephrasing the introduction, saying again what the overview is. Okay, so let's look at that question again. Sorry. Oh no, sorry, just going in the wrong direction there, I apologize. Let's look at the sample question. So the maps below show the town of Bilston in 1990 and as it is today. And again, look at the rubric, the instruction, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons. So there you've got a map or a plan of the town in 1990 and as it is today. So I think it's really useful with map questions to make a little grid, something like this. So on your test paper, just put down something like this, you know, what's added, what's gone, what's got bigger, perhaps what's got smaller, excuse me, and possibly any other points that strike you as important. So let's go back, and what I want you to do in the chat box, please, is tell me what's been added to the town of Bilston since 1990. Let's have a look at the map again. So in the chat box, please, what has been added to Bilston? Okay, yes, yep, golf course. Yeah, camping site, restaurant, very good.
Imagine. In the UK, we're still on lockdown and allowed out of our houses only one time a day.
What's got bigger or increased? Let's go back.
Just a quick thing, if a child bursts through the door, don't be too surprised. The children are supposed to be doing their studies in the kitchen, but sometimes they come in here. I have put a notice on the door, but you never know.
Very good. Hotels.
So this is where I live. It's a small village just north of Oxford, right in the centre of the UK.
What's been taken
I'm a teacher
away?
of trade.
Let's go back. What's been taken away? Again, answers in the chat box, please. Okay, yes, woodland. Okay, excellent. All right. So let's look at what I put in there.
Because it's a different publisher,
as you all
but
said,
you may be familiar with that.
Also roads.
But
there were 2 new roads, and of course the car park.
Last
what's got bigger?
Probably 8-9 years.
Hotels got bigger, and there's a restaurant as part of it. So the new restaurant could be here, or it could be in what's been added, or it could be here. And more shops, and more housing. Okay. And what's been taken away? Well, as you all said, the woodlands have been taken away, but also some of the housing disappeared because the shops took up more room. For me, there isn't actually any other major point that I think is worth recording in terms of the differences between those two maps. So there we've got a little plan of the main things that have changed. So let's have a look how we can express those things to write a good introduction. Okay, so vocabulary. All right, so again, the overview, remember, like it is for all the task 1 questions, is looking at the big picture, the overall change. We're not looking at detail in our overview, in our introduction. So we're looking at the vocabulary like modernized, urbanized, transformed, industrialized, those sort of words to describe the development overall of a town or city. Whereas when we get into the body paragraphs, there we are describing the actual changes, the individual changes. So there's a different, in some ways, there's a sort of different set of vocabulary. We've got things like other changes such as expanded and extended, enlarged, that sort of thing. And we've got new things that are built or constructed or established or opened. And of course, things disappear. So demolished, chopped down, cleared, removed, those sort of words. So the vocabulary for the overview is a sort of the big picture vocabulary, and the vocabulary for describing changes in the body paragraphs is specific to the actual change that happened. Okay, staying with the sort of vocabulary and grammar, we've got, this is what the map showed. The maps below show the town of Bilston in 1990 and as it is today. Okay, so think about what tenses are you going to use for a question like this. Okay, so again, if you would please, in the chat box where I can see it, can you put down what tenses, what verb tenses you think you will need to use to describe the town then and now? Yes, yeah, brilliant. Present, past, and somebody, I didn't catch their name, sorry, is present perfect. Exactly, exactly. So the simple past, the present simple, and the present perfect. And again, a piece of advice, if in the test you do this, so by the side of the diagram, you put the tenses that you feel that you should be using just to remind yourself to use them. Okay, so just put that simple past, present simple, present perfect, and just as you look at the maps again, that reminds you to try and bring in those tenses. Okay, so let's use all of that information, the vocabulary, our brainstorming of the changes, the grammar, and let's put that into the introduction. Okay, so there we have it. The instructions on the test paper said the maps below show the town of Bilston in 1990 and as it is today. So we've changed that. The 2 maps of Bilston show what the town was like in 1990 and how it is currently. Okay, so it's just changing it around. And looking at those big changes, we say it's clear that Bilston has been both urbanized and modernized. Okay, so let's have another look at the 2 maps. And the thing I need to point out, and I should have done earlier, is that if you have maps or plans, you will nearly always have a symbol that shows you which way is north. Okay, so you can see that in the middle. Okay, good. All right, so just have a look at that. Now, what do you think, after all the work we've done in it, what do you think goes into the overview? Yeah, exactly. As we've said, it is the main points. Okay, so then let's have a look at what the body paragraph will look like. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, just please, to read through that answer. Okay, so there are the three parts. The introduction with the rephrasing and the overview, the body paragraph describing the change, and then the conclusion, which is just a rewording of what we said in the introduction. Okay, so I've got some questions for you. What I'd like you to do in the chat box, please, is can you put what tense the verbs in the body paragraph, the verbs in blue are? Yes, okay, good, present. Present simple, yeah, absolutely. Okay, question number 2. What is the tense of the verbs in green? Okay, you're all obviously very good at grammar. Yes, present perfect, and somebody's even put present perfect passive. Excellent, yes, have been constructed, has been expanded. Well done. And lastly, the verbs in purple. What tense is that? Yep, absolutely, the simple past. So let's just go back. Okay, so we looked at it, the picture, we looked at those two maps. At the side of the test paper, we wrote down the 3 tenses that we thought we'd be able to use: simple past, the present simple, present perfect, and then in the body of the thing, we use those 3 tenses, which shows how our grammatical range, how good that is. Okay, excellent. And just a quick look at the conclusion. Remember, the conclusion is not necessary, but if you do have time, it's nice to do, and you can put it, just repeat your overview in different language. Okay. Okay, so as I said, we're going to just summarize what we've done on process diagrams and the maps. So let's just go through. Okay, so the process diagrams, put the overview, stating the number of steps in the introduction. Okay, remember the introduction is a paragraph. It has about 2 sentences. The first sentence is the rephrasing of what the diagram or map or picture is. And then in this case, a process diagram, the overview is how many steps there are to the process. And I do suggest that you put the first step and the last step to show the beginning and the end of the whole process. Okay, very, very important in terms of being logical and for a good score in cohesion and coherence. Make sure that your body paragraph describes the same number of steps. No more, no less. If you say 9, write about 9. Don't write about 8, don't write about 10, because that's illogical. Okay, so do count those steps. Use the passive voice where appropriate, and it will be generally appropriate for most stages in a process. So do remember, make a little note to yourself saying passive voice present or passive voice past, whichever is appropriate to that particular diagram. And of course, use the linkers. Linking the steps with sequential linkers. Firstly, secondly, after that, next, etc., etc. Okay, so 4 simple steps. And to summarize the 2 map questions. Okay, so again, emphasizing again and again and again, the importance of the overview. Put it into the introduction, stating the biggest changes. And then make sure that your body paragraph describes those changes logically. And that would be usually the biggest to the smallest, or perhaps what's been added to what's been lost. So look at it and remember to do that plan so you can see clearly what the major changes are to the map. Okay, look at the dates of the two maps and make sure you use the appropriate tenses. So if it's in the past and now, or if it's now and in the future. And make a little note at the side of the diagram on the test paper to remind yourself to use those tenses. And remember to make comparisons. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the question and answer box. So if you've got any questions for me, please write them in the question and answer box now. And then at the end, I'll come back and I will give you a list of resources that you can use. So any questions you've got in the question and answer box. Yosef is asking, to express a number of steps, should I use a number symbol or should I use the word? I think it's probably in the introduction, I would use the word, I'd say 9. I would write that, I think, for this. Okay. The overview, somebody's saying, what was the overview for the map? The overview for the map was saying that it had been urbanized and modernized. That was the big picture. The word, somebody's saying, Asma is saying, the word isn't, is that counted as 1 or 2 words? Asma, you shouldn't really, in academic writing, you shouldn't use contractions. You should say is not. And therefore, obviously, would be 2 words. Okay. So somebody's asking, if I answer a question but with 100 words, what would the score be? That's Asma as well. Sorry, no, it's not. That's Ramsey. Ramsey, I think the problem is that if you only wrote 100 words, you probably haven't actually answered the question thoroughly. The questions are designed so it should take about 150, 170 words to write the report, to write the description. So I suspect if you're only writing 100, you're not you're not selecting all the right data. So I think you should probably think about, you know, have I missed something here? Somebody's saying, what happens? A very good question. What happens if we report everything instead of selecting important information? Anjali, the problem is with that is that they ask you to select. I mean, that's part of the instructions. If they wanted you to describe everything, they would ask you to describe everything. So I think you do have to select and choose the most important thing. Sanjela is saying, in diagram, if I choose 11, no, as long as you can describe 11. In that process, I had 9, but you could have split the bit in the kiln up into 3 different processes, steps, if you wanted to. The important thing is to count them and put them on the actual test paper, and then only describe that number in your body paragraph. Hamza is asking what happens if you use American English while writing. Absolutely no problem. It doesn't matter whether you use American English or British English. Okay. Sorry if I pronounce your name, Balasubrahamin. Can we imagine or assume while comparing maps? No, you can't assume or imagine. The idea is to actually describe what you can see in front of you. Okay, so no, don't add anything, no personal comments, just describe what you see. Melanie, can we use contraction, like it's? No, this is academic writing and we don't use contractions. When you're speaking, in the speaking test, of course you can, because speaking is different. But in your writing, it should be it is, cannot, will not, that sort of thing. Sorry. Question that comes up a lot, Upeka, how to ensure that we have 150 words without counting. But it's good, it's very important that you don't count. The best way of doing that, if you're doing the paper-based test, is if you download, go to IELTS.org and download an answer sheet and practice writing your essay on that. And then count your words on that, and that will tell you that you need half a page to write 150 words, or perhaps if you've got very big handwriting, it might take you 3/4 of a page. You just need to get a rough idea of about 150 words. Okay. I said that you had to give the number of steps and start the first and last one. Can you give an example? I did actually give an example, Fanny. So when you get the link to this, do go and have a look at that model. And you'll see that I'd said from the digging of the clay to the transportation of the bricks. Okay, so I did give the first and last step. What kind of words should you not use for academic writing? Well, obviously, if it's academic, we're not going to be using slang or informal language. We're going to use more correct language. We're not going to use contractions. We tend not to use phrasal verbs. We tend to use longer verbs normally. So, but it's mainly don't use slang or idioms, that sort of thing. Again, can we use words like don't? No, you must use do not. Okay. Will they ask us about the current situation like Corona? I really don't think they will, no. I don't think that's something that anyone's going to ask you to write about. They won't give you graphs about it, and I'm sure they won't ask you to write a task 2 essay. Someone's asking, Mia, Ned, do we always need to write just one body paragraph? Can we split the information logically into 2 paragraphs? Well, Mia, honestly, it's one of those questions where I can't say yes or no. It's a depend question, it depends. Some processes might have 2 distinct parts. For example, if you're describing the process of tea making, some of the work goes on outside, when the tea is picked and everything. And then some of the work is done inside a factory where it's dried and packaged. So there you may well use 2 paragraphs, but very often in a process, it is just 1 body paragraph. Ishika, can we use idioms? Idioms aren't really appropriate in academic writing, Ishika. Faruz, if I exceed the word limit, will it affect my score much? No, there's no upper limit. 150 words is the lower limit, the minimum, but there's no upper limit. So if you've written 170, 160, 170, 180 words, that would probably be fine. And that's the same answer to Alpha. There's no deduction, there's no problem if you write more than 150 words. My 2 model answers were about 175, 180 words.